And welcome back to Masters of Modern. I'm your host, Alex Kessler, here with my co-host, Ben Bateman.
What's up, man? How you doing? We're back together. The two-man show experience is here. It feels like I can hardly even remember a time we did this show in the same room, to be honest.
We were talking about this earlier. I think the last time I saw you was in Portland.
Yeah, in March.
Yeah.
The first weekend of March. And who knows when the next time I'll see you will be, to be honest with you. It's a little shocking to realize how easy you can not go into public places with people you know. I could never have guessed that this was going to be the case, but it is. And we're all surviving. We're all aliving. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Magic. We're here to talk about a big time announcement.
So the Masters of Modern podcast is a podcast about Modern and Magic and kind of all the things that are adjacent to that. It is the only podcast sponsored by Cracklin Oat Brand cereal, the goat of all cereals. It tastes great. You should try it. We're not actually sponsored by Cracklin Oat Brand. That's just the best. But
if you guys would like to, Alex is almost like his Twitter is basically sponsored by Cookie Dough Bites. That's like a thing that's been going on for a while.
If you can get the Kellogg's Twitter account to tweet at us nice things about the fact that we love Cracklin Oat Brand and would totally be sponsored by Cracklin Oat Brand, we would appreciate it. Hashtag MMCast Cracklin Goat Brand. Because it's the goat
brand.
Yeah. So Wizards just casually tweeted this morning, on Monday, 7/13, there will be an update to the banned and restricted list impacting the following formats: Historic, Pioneer, Modern, and Pauper. So all the formats, all of them. I mean, not all of them. Legacy and Vintage are just hanging out, not doing anything. Standard isn't being affected, but basically all the mid-tier, non-rotating formats and Pauper. And there's kind of a lot of speculation on what that could mean, why we're at a point where these formats need banning, what cards they be looking at. We have the metagames of each of them in the top 10 cards. So we're going to talk about kind of what each of the metagames look like as far as like what are the most played cards in each of those formats and what cards do we think are likely to be banned.
That is today's topic. And yeah, it's been an interesting time these last couple of years, as we mentioned on a recent episode. You know, there's been a lot of bannings in multiple formats. There's been a lot of powerful cards printed, and Magic's in like sort of a weird flux state because these bannings that they're talking about, they're really in reference to digital tournaments. They're not really in reference to paper tournaments because those aren't happening right now. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of your paper collection and the deck you've been playing for the last several months that you're so good with and excited about getting wrecked, you haven't played any Magic, probably paper in person with people, or if you have a very, very minimal amount. So this is really something that is referencing the digital metagame. But I think we have some ideas as far as what we think it might be. The last major banning in Modern that we experienced was the banning of Oko and the banning of Once Upon a Time, which were
like companions being soft banned.
Oh yeah, companions being changed. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Not a proper banning, and then Mox Opal as well was at the same time. Am I correct about that?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, all three.
Interesting. It's been interesting how Mox Opal being banned. My feed has had such little like calls to unban it. There hasn't been like a Splinter Twin-esque unban Mox Opal kind of outcry, but compared to Faithless Looting, a card that, like, if a year ago I would have argued was the much more problematic card, I get daily, maybe, like, posts on our Facebook group or on Twitter saying kind of like unban Faithless Looting, which I think has been really interesting. I think it's just like the whole that card has left like a lot of strategies without really a good home, like Mardu Pyromancer decks. Like the decks that it was like problematic in, stuff like Dredge, are fine. But the decks that like really relied on it and its power level to survive, like just to have disappeared. Phoenix decks, Mardu Pyromancer decks, other kind of cool effects. So it's been pretty sad that it's been gone. And Mox Opal then later. I mean, that's kind of interesting, right? We talked about this a lot last week where, you know, when we talked about kind of the survival of Pioneer is modern, but in really Magic in general over the last year and a half has had more bannings than ever before in history. In every form.
By far. Right?
Everything from Modern to Legacy to Vintage to Standard to Historic to Pioneer to Pauper, like literally like across the board. Both powerful sets being printed into those formats, so totally altering them and then banning cards out of them to kind of survive that. And so it's been really fascinating. and painful in ways to go through. And I do think that we're getting to the point where we're leveling out a little bit. I don't think for most of the part, these formats are like, I don't think people were like, no, we don't need cards banned, right? Like, I think like the main culprits here are all pretty blatant offenders that people can look at and be like, okay, let's get rid of it. I think some of it is also, and we'll talk about Astrolabe a little bit later, but like that's a card that I think they're like, you know what, we're banning it here. Let's just ban it in all the places that that it's like a real problem. So I think it's going to be interesting to see like what gets knocked out and what doesn't. But yeah.
I think there's also one really interesting piece of this equation, and I think it's that in March, when COVID-19 became the talking point of the world, and we were all reacting, and the United States by and large closed for a few weeks. We're at this point now where a lot of people are very, very tired of the lifestyle they've been forced to live, and that means that some people are rebelling and deciding to go out and risking the consequences, and that's a thing, and they've just decided that they're gonna go out and be reckless. And then there are some people who are like, a lot of people who are like, you know what? This is going to last for a while. So the life I've started to live these last few months is unfortunately going to have to be the life that I'm living for the next little while until there's a vaccine, until the world starts to actually sort of return to normalcy. This isn't going away in 2 weeks. My LGS is not going to be having F&M starting in July. Like, wow. It's going to probably be 2021. Like, it's probably something like that, or maybe at best the end of the year. And so with that in mind, I think a lot of people are now, like, I can speak personally, I'm finally settled into like, all right, so if I want to play Magic, it's going to be Arena, it's going to be Moto, or it's going to be Skype with my friends. That's unfortunately all I got. I don't get to go to GPs. My London GP trip that I have planned, though it's still booked, I don't think I'll go. Or if I do go, I won't be playing Magic in London. And I think it's really interesting because it's given me a little bit of an opportunity to refocus on, okay, I want to keep playing Magic, so I'm going to have to figure out how to do it. And now, right?
Yeah, and I think also just like these are all non-rotating formats, right? So like the only way to deal with that there's a problem is to ban something, and there's like pretty blatant kind of issues amongst them. I mean, like, if you look at historic, basically Nexus of Fate decks that are ramping have taken over with like the last tournament that was big, red-green mid-range kind of coming in and doing a lot, but basically those are the two main decks. You're either playing blue-green or red-green. And then if you look at just other different formats, different things are available. But yeah, so what format do you want to start with?
I think why don't we close with Modern because it's going to be our big one, and why don't we start with Pauper because it was listed and it's a fringe format for us, right? We don't talk about Pauper very often.
So Pauper is pretty easy to me. Is Mystic Sanctuary, and this is an interesting too because what's interesting about the Pauper bans is I think these are cards that they're going to ban in other places as well. And Mystic Sanctuary is going to be the one that's really interesting. Do they ban Mystic Sanctuary in other formats? Because this card is a miserable card and is worse in other formats where you can find it with fetch lands. At least in Pauper you can't do that. But in Pauper it's just the combination of Mystic Sanctuary and Dispel. And cards like, Delver of Secrets are just like easy early threats. Like the Delver decks are just like, it's too powerful. You can just literally loop a Mystic Sanctuary and Dispel, countering their spell every single turn, soft locking them out of the game while you beat them down with the Delver of Secrets and a Ninja of the Deep Hours and just kind of go off and win the game. So I think that's a card here that definitely needs to go. Now applying that to Modern and Historic and other formats is going to be interesting to see if they do it there. And
I do want to give a quick shout out just to remind everybody, this show is brought to you by the Nobles of House Modern, Cam Albergini, and Andrew Kelso. We appreciate you guys. We jump into a little 10-minute chat, hang out on the Discord with those guys before the show. Anybody who is at that level of the Patreon. So go check out patreon.com/theMMcast if you guys want to find out about that. But yeah, let's maybe move on to what do you want to go? Historic next?
Yeah, let's do Historic. In vague order of also formats we've played less towards formats we play more, though I've actually played more Historic than Pioneer. I'm
gonna fire up some Historic literally as soon as we're done with this show. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to build something and I'm going to start playing. I'm very excited about it.
You should just stream it. Just turn the camera on. Just go for it. Hang out with people.
I don't know, man. I get embarrassed.
People like
know what I'm doing
being
first.
Bad at Magic. So I think the big ones here for me like are Nexus of Fate and Wilderness Reclamation. I think those two cards are just like have been miserable since they've existed together and need to go. And I think like the problem with if you just get rid of Nexus of Fate, they still have Discontinuity, the new card that ends the turn. So it's worse. You don't have 8 copies of that effect, but like I think that the deck just like is a pain. I've played a little bit of it, and it's like even on my side of playing with the deck, it's like, oh, this is just kind of unfun and shouldn't be a thing.
I wouldn't have expected Wilderness Wreck to be the kind of powerhouse and the kind of annoying powerhouse it was when they printed it. I guess I read it initially because you and I think talked about it in our set review, and I think we definitely talked about it, but I didn't look at it and go just like I guess it just seemed too obvious. It cost 4 mana. Like it just how was that going to be that problematic? Like counter it, bounce it, destroy it, counter the big spell. Like there just seemed so many things that you could do to not lose to it, but it's been a huge problem.
I think the thing that people missed with it originally was the fact that it untapped at the end of the turn it came into play, ostensibly making it free as long as you're playing any number of cards with flash or a number of instants. And at the same time, not kind of like grokking or contextualizing the fact that the format had so many powerful instant speed effects between early on with the there's like the green wolf that like makes wolves every turn, like the back end of Mayor
Mystic,
and then obviously the big one being Nexus of Fate, just like was a buy a box promo, right? And it was like good, and people were playing it in control shells, but it like wasn't like backbreaking. And then the printing of these 2 cards together, plus like Growth Spiral being able to ramp out that enchantment a turn earlier than we even thought you probably could do it. Like I think just all those things together. And
I think that's a really important piece. And I've seen people tweet about this, but I think again, just like sort of for a general understanding of like how this all worked together, it's the idea that you want to be able to play it and then untap and then cast something at instant speed. But the thing that ramps you into it a turn earlier also is at instant speed and also draws you a card. So like you just and blue interaction at instant speed classically is good. So if you're going to play Growth Spiral, it probably means you have blue things that are also good. So like the only turn you're really going for it is the turn you cast Wilderness Wreck. And like if they want to like counter it or destroy it or figure out a way to interact with you, fine. But that's kind of the only way to win. Otherwise, the second it resolves, like you are in such a good position, it's so hard to lose.
Right.
The ramp aspect is insane.
And some of it, like it came out in Ravnica block, right? Or Ravnica block, I guess. But it came out a year before, like, or 6 months before Nexus of Fate and 9 months before, or to a year before, the different Throne of Eldraine cards. So it was like ahead of the game in that sense. So I think that was also part of it, right? It just like it didn't come out at a moment where it was the most powerful thing. Now we're here, and I think it's done. I think like just it eventually got enough support where it's like very powerful. And next,
I saw there was like a tweet the other day. I saw you interact with it. Somebody was like, "It's crazy that these 4 cards are legal in standard right now." And it was like Uro, Growth Spiral, Wilderness Wreck, and what was the 4th card? Oh, and Azusa. And it was like, oh yeah, that's that definitely seems like modern power level. That like does not at all feel like that should be standard legal.
Right. And that to me, speaking of cards, is the big question I have: is does Uro also get banned?
Well, so we don't play.
That'll be a question.
Or haven't played. We haven't played as much Historic. I think Wilderness Wreck, for the obvious reason you explained, and Nexus of Fate. I think it's fair to assume both those get banned. Like, we just saw what happened with Pioneer. We just saw like the reaction people had to a stale metagame. I think they really want to make sure that doesn't happen in Historic. So I think probably a little more preemptive is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Let's talk Uro, because Uro stretches into multiple formats. And I think the question there is, do you want to talk standard first? With that, or like, what do you think?
Standard's not having a card banned, right? So it's Pioneer, Pauper, Modern, and Historic. I think Pioneer is the easiest to talk about. There's like there's one deck that's problematic, and they just might ban like other cards that they're banning out of Historic.
Inverter?
What? Inverter? Yeah.
Inverter? Yeah.
Like they need to ban cards out of Inverter. What cards they banned is going to be a question. I think like Inverter's probably the obvious answer to me, because I think just get rid of the deck. Like if you get rid of Jace, there's still Thassa's Oracle. If you get rid of Thassa's Oracle, there's still Jace. Like both sides of that coin. I think like it's too redundant now unless you're going to ban all of them. But just if you ban Inverter, you now live in a world where that just isn't a thing. You can't use that effect.
I think it's valuable too, because we haven't talked a lot about the Inverter deck on this podcast. We talked about it like a little bit here and there. We actually didn't talk about it last week on the Pioneer episode too much. So to explain to people what it is, because I actually think that if they do ban it in Pioneer, let's pretend they ban Inverter, which I think is a pretty reasonable thing to expect they'll do. We all have seen what happens, right? If one thing gets banned in one powerful Eternal format, usually you will go and try it in another one. So like, if it's powerful enough to get banned, that will set off the red alarm for players in Modern to go start messing around with trying to make Inverter work. And I know they've already tried it, but like, if you can't play it in Pioneer, there's a decent chance people will try it in Modern. So Inverter, let's pull it up and explain what it does, because I feel like it's probably valuable.
It is. So, and there's a funny story at the end of this conversation, but where'd it go? I had it. Inverter of Truth. 2 black, creature Eldrazi, devoid, which doesn't really matter, but it's a colorless card. It is a 6/6 flying, and then when Inverter of Truth enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your library face down, then shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. So you basically, by playing it, your graveyard goes away, and your library goes away, and your graveyard becomes your library. They use this in combo with Thassa's Oracle or Jace, the War of the Spark Jace Wielder of Mysteries, which both have the ability to win you the game if your deck is empty. And then they also use it with Delve spells, most commonly Dig Through Time, to remove all the cards in your graveyard, so that when Inverter comes into play, there's nothing there, right? You literally exile your graveyard, getting Inverter and Thassa's Oracle, and play them and win the game. So it kind of like all works together. All these are cards that are just like good by themselves. Worst case scenario, you remove your graveyard, you put the cards you've already cast, which are probably better than the random stuff in your deck, into play. So you're drawing gas every turn, and you have a 6/6 flying in play. Is like your worst case scenario. So it just attacks on so many different angles that it becomes a problem, and has become like most of the metagame in Pioneer, to the point when we did our episode last week on Is Pioneer Dead, I think the 2 most common comments were, 1, that we were incorrect on which set it started with. It starts with Return to Ravnica. 2 was that the set that we didn't talk about the metagame in our like analysis of why Pioneer is doing badly, because the metagame is relevant in the sense that it's been bad. It's just been this Inverter deck basically since December, and nothing has been done. So I think
it's interesting. It's interesting too, by the way. I don't mean to cut you off, but just while we're on the subject of Inverter, like, they've tried to print Inverter style cards for years. And this is actually like a very, very interesting pitfall, because I think that sometimes they kind of miss stuff like this. What they'll do is they'll take a template, right? So like Inverter is not that different from the 6/6 flying for 4 that got printed. Desecrator Demon, the one from a couple years ago, where they could sack a creature to tap it, right?
That your opponent could sack a creature to tap it like twice a turn. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's Abyssal Persecutor. There's been a bunch of these, right? Like it's a fairly common template, which is like the demon, the giant flying demon, like the 6/6 flying for 4. There's some drawback that makes the card hard to play. And you see this pattern a lot. Wizards does it, and it's not just with 6/6s for 4 that have a drawback. It's like you see it years and years and years and years in a row, right? Like there's all the reasons why did Dig Through Time get printed? Why did Treasure Cruise get printed? Because they were trying to find ways to print power cards with Delve and make them cool and have flavor and feel like they were throwbacks to things that were too good. That's what they always do.
New cards to be exciting. They're not going to like they have to make conscientious decisions to make boring cards. So they're going to try pushing stuff. They're like, oh, it would be dope if Delve could get you Ancestral Recall, except it was too powerful.
Right. So they do that. And so that's how Inverter gets printed, right? They don't print Inverter thinking, we're going to print this in concert with a card like Jace or a card like Lab Maniac or a card like Thassa's Oracle and make this some stupid combo deck. That's like, this card's not supposed to do that.
Continue.
There's a backside to every time you print a card like this, where, our friends that design these cards, they look at the template and they go, that's cool. That interacts with other effects, like your non-graveyard things. Like, that's interesting. Maybe this is powerful, but they don't go like, we're going to print this, and then we're going to print Thassa's Oracle in a few years, and this is going to be the best thing you can do. Well, that's not the way it's designed.
And if you think about it, this deck hasn't been good in Modern yet. Like, maybe it one day will be, but it hasn't been. And it would never have existed in Standard. And Inverter of Truth was a not card for its entire time in Standard, since literally the printing until Thassa's Oracle was printed and Pioneer was announced. So, like, from their perspective, this kind of came out probably out of left field. Didn't even think that this was a cool combo. The other thing is, like, up until last year, Laboratory Maniac was the only card that let you win without having cards in your deck, and is a very popular card. So Wizards like, oh, let's lean into that space. Let's come up with some cool ones. And then they printed 2 better versions of it. One is 2 mana as a triggered ability and does stuff, and the other one is a Planeswalker that has a card advantage engine attached to it. So both of those cards are good enough to play now in your main deck and do stuff even if you're not comboing, which Laboratory Maniac was only useful for, and also at mana costs for their power level that are more efficient than a 2/2, right? Like Laboratory Maniac is a 2/2 for 3. That's a bad rate. Thassa's Oracle is a what is the exact? I forget. It's a 2. It's a 1/3 for 2, which is a decent blocker that then has an ETB that draws you cards. And Jace is literally a combo piece, or is literally a Jace the Mind Sculptor Planeswalker. He draws you cards.
They're definitely much better than Lab Maniac. There's no doubt about that.
And so like those two added together with literally a card that the world has forgotten, other than maybe the fact that I remember seeing it spoiled, thinking that it inverted your graveyard and library, so your library became your graveyard and your graveyard became your library. Yeah. And I spent an entire flight from Hong Kong brewing sweet decks, thinking that's what the card did because it wasn't on decked yet. So I was using random stand-ins. Then landed, looked at the card again, and was informed that all of that time was wasted on decks that didn't work. It ends up when you can do that, you can get a lot of Vengevines into play on turn 3. I think is what I was pulling off. Thank you, Simeon Spirit God. But yes, so I think just like they didn't see this coming, and I think the reason they've been reticent to get rid of it is because of Splinter Twin. I think the reason it's taken them this long to act is because Splinter Twin was so beloved. It was fine in the modern metagame, right? Like it was probably too powerful. It put a weird chokehold on the format, but there were many decks in the format while it existed. It was a very fun deck to play against. And they thought this could be the Pioneer Splinter Twin, and we don't want to get rid of this because we literally get calls daily to unban Splinter Twin, and it ends up that this is just a more miserable version of it, right? Splinter Twin was like a controlled tempo deck that had, famously said by Andrew Brown, like Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the back end of it, right? Like that. Yeah. These cards don't do anything until they win you the game, but everything else is a really good flash-based tempo lightning bolt deck, and so. Like, that's a more fun deck to exist than what Inverter decks end up being, which are much more pure combo with, like, control elements. So, yeah, I think that's, like, what Pioneer is looking at. The one thing that could happen is they could get rid of stuff like Uro and Mystic Dispute. If they decide Uro is a mistake in general or in internal formats, they might nix things in formats that maybe it's not too powerful in right now. Like, Uro's not the most insane thing happening in Pioneer, but that's because this Inverter deck is putting a chokehold, and they just might get rid of it to, like, they might just be culling the world. So, like, if they ban Uro in every format, ban it. If they ban Mystic Sanctuary in every format, they'll ban it.
On that topic, on the Uro topic,
which is who we should talk about next. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you like that style of design? Like the inevitability, value engine, grindy, good early, good late. Like this kind of just does everything. It doesn't just outright win the game on its own, but like unless you have a perfectly good strategy, this will get me enough advantage to win the game.
I love Flashback. Right? I love Lingering Souls. I love Sandcastle.
So do I. Yeah.
I love the ability to rebuy spells from my graveyard. I love that card.
But just to draw the distinction, to draw the distinction, I want you to answer, so people understand, because I'm asking, because I also love Flashback. Like a Flashback card that gives you something valuable in your graveyard, like Lingering Souls, all about that. I'm talking about something where, like, draw a card.
Let me finish. I love Flashback. God. But I love that Wizards figured out a way to fix the way, making it so that a flashback mechanic can be on creatures and permanents that go into play, as well as spells and stuff that's, say, in your graveyard, right? That's like one of the things that is interesting about Escape. I think that eventually this is going to kill you no matter what you do off of one card is not a thing that I love. I think that in general is a mistake. And I'm fine for value engines, right? Like I like Planeswalkers. I like that they are a card you play and they slowly build you value as they go, and then eventually they win you the game. Like that's kind of what Uro does, right? Except that Uro doesn't have answers to it most of the time, where like a Planeswalker, you just attack it, right? You play one of the now hundreds of destroy, exile, kill, target Planeswalker, or counter it or whatever, Uro goes into your graveyard. So there's like, unless you can exile him or get some type of like pacifism effect on him, he is going to come back, and he's getting them value in the meantime. So even if you get rid of it, he's drawn them at least 2 cards and gained them 4 life and put 2 lands into play. I think Uro was a mistake. And it sucks because like I think the red-black one's fine. I think that card's awesome and really cool.
Yeah, Croxa is really cool. I think Croxa is better in terms of that. Like I find Croxa to be like way less oppressive. I think I ask you the question, and I apologize for interrupting because you were obviously explaining yourself, but I do think there's an important distinction to draw because I'm such a fan of the flashback mechanic and the idea that your graveyard is valuable. Like I'm with you 150% there. And I actually like that historically most flashback spells are kind of weak. Like Lingering Souls is Anomaly. Like that's a really good card. Like usually you're dealing with like Thrill of the Hunt or like some really bad aftermath spell. Like those are just, that's usually what it is. It's like you're getting value in the fact that Firebolt costs you 5 mana for a sorcery speed shock. I'm all about it. I love Lava Dart, but like none of those are game breaking. The thing about Uro that I find hard to play against, and I think I don't like it. It's not my favorite style of card, but it's also just the decks I like to play don't really get along with it. I don't like that you, for 3 mana, 3 life is basically enough to 3 life equals about a half a card, like ish. Usually 6 life's about a card. So if 3 is maybe half a card, and you're getting to put a land into play, which means you're getting ahead, and you're in green, which probably means you're doing pretty big things anyway. And then the fact that later in the game, you can get a 6/6, but also the fact that when it attacks, you get that same thing again. It just means that literally all you have to do with the card is resolve it once, get it into play. And if you even get to attack with it, I mean, if you even get to attack once, you're so far ahead at such a ridiculous rate. Like I've had to use so many resources and have all the toolbox things to answer what you're doing. That doesn't make my experience as a player very fun because it's 1 card. Like it's just literally 1 card in your deck. If you think about the things that are required to answer every phase of that card, that's really hard for most decks to deal with. So what you're required to do is you have to kind of race it or you have to tempo around it. But if it just happens and you're like, I'm going to do my powerful thing, you do your powerful thing, I probably don't have very many cards in my deck that have the same DNA as yours.
Right, you have to go.
You're getting a lot of value,
and you've seen that, right? You have to go over. You have to play Ugin. You have to play Urion, bouncing a bunch of things, getting a bunch of value, and having a flyer that can go over it. You have to play, what was the red enchantment that let you cast cards for free?
Fires
of Invention, right? Like
right?
Like that's like the crazy thing about Standard is we haven't existed in real Standard for 9 months. Maybe longer, maybe a year, right? Like this is not the standard that Wizards tested the cards that are currently in Standard for. Right now, Uro would have been being answered by Okos. There was a very good format defining answer available, and that was Oko, right? The format would have had Field of the Deads blocking them. They would have had Fires of Inventions legal. The companion mechanic would work the way it was supposed to. So like it's hard to look at the format in the context that it's in, and Standard, and even historic, and to a certain extent, without keeping in mind that the format is not what was tested, and that like there are answers that have been banned. Like you were supposed to be able to play Veil of Summer in this Standard format. That was a card that was available, and it's weird, right? Because like also Uro versus Teferi 3 mana. Teferi Time Raveler? There's too many Teferi.
Teferi Time Raveler.
Yeah. Like, is it a weird matchup? And almost it's a great answer against those Planeswalkers, right? And so on one hand, you can see that they had like up the scale because of that, and it's like almost an arms race. And I think that's kind of the issue they ran into, and they're going to try and fix that. But I do think Uro in general ended up being a mistake. I don't think it's Oko bad, but I can see it just slowly being banned out of every format as a card that's just like, they're like, you know what, this is the top end of what shouldn't exist. And in your defense, it's like, not in your defense, kind of what you're saying is like, what if Finks' Revelation came with a 6/6?
Well, that basically is, I was just going to go lead into that. That is Hydroid Krasis. And basically Hydroid Krasis is a fair card. I'm fine with you playing a Hydroid Krasis. If you have lots of mana and you have growth spiraled and ramped into it, and you play your Krasis and you draw lots of cards, you gain lots of life, you have a big threat. Okay, I'll give you your cards. I'll give you your life. I'll answer your threat. Like, that you had to spend, in theory, like a giant buildup to get there. Like that's the only time you've played the card. I know that it triggers uncast, so like they designed the card to be cool and valuable in the same way that Uro is cool and valuable. You're getting when you cast it. So even if I counter it, it doesn't matter. But I'm still totally okay playing against that. Like that to me feels so much more like the way I sort of, I don't know if you're the same way as me, but like when I think of Magic in general, I look at a card and I tend to try to think of it in terms of like a 1-for-1 value. So if I have to find some weird way to 2-for-1 myself to do something I want to do, like we've joked plenty about like Mirror Superior, but like I'm basically having to sort of 2-for-1 myself to get that into play, jump through a second hoop to do it. All right, like I know what I'm getting into. I'm trading off to get something cool, or at least I was then. You're not trading off to do anything with Uro. Like it's just designed to be kind of like a 2-for-1 against your opponent in itself. And that's I think where like the unfun experience for me comes in, because again, like you think about rate in Magic, is it how much mana is it to draw a card? You know, how much mana is it to destroy something or to deal damage to something when you're evaluating burn spells, or you're looking at that new 1-drop that exists in M21 that gets +2/+1. You know, if you have X number of cards in your opponent's graveyard, like anytime they design on some metric like that, you're like, all right, how much power can I get on turn 1 for 1 mana? All those things are like sort of fairly easy to understand. It's when you don't have like a there isn't like an obvious drawback. What's the drawback to Uro? Like that's the question. What's the drawback?
You do not nothing on turn 3, right? But like your turn 3 play is, if they're applying real pressure to you, doesn't stabilize enough at times. Like if they have like 2 creatures in play, it doesn't gain you the life you need. I guess you don't die and you draw a card, so you don't like waste the turn. But so there's that. He's not always the easiest to escape, right? The 6 is a significant number, and getting that number out into your deck has its challenges, and so he's not like a guaranteed turn 4 card. You have to really be trying to do it to pull that off, but that's it, right? You're not wrong. Like, I mean, I guess the other thing is just like, he's a 6/6 ground pounder that's gaining them life. Like if you're a combo deck, who cares? If you're Inverter, who, like, one of the reasons I don't think Uro is a big problem in Pioneer right now is because like Inverter's like, you can do whatever you want.
That's a good point. I think your point about Kroxa though is really sound, which is that like Kroxa is effectively designed with the exact same design space. It's just what you're getting out of Kroxa is so much less oppressive. It doesn't feel like draining in the same way. But I do think the other point you made that I wanted to focus on was the inevitability of a Planeswalker is, unless you're dealing with, you know, Elspeth from Theros, like that has escape. Most of them are like very face value. They come down, you play them, like they do good things. If you can keep them around for a couple turns, you're probably getting a good amount of advantage. If you can keep them around for like 4 or 5 turns, you probably win the game, unless they're getting attacked every turn. Again, like there's a 1-for-1 value to that. I think about like, what am I going to need to do to get rid of your thing? And if I can get rid of it, it's probably not coming back, right? Like Uro's not even on the table, and you've already gained 3 and drawn a card, or put a land into play, I should say. But anyway, so enough of Uro. I think we're kind of on the same page. My opinion is that I want that card. I think that card should be banned. I'm like not a fan of playing against it. I don't think it makes Magic better to have that card around.
Sure, and it's like an interesting feature to it is, yeah, like it's interesting that Kroxa is like a fair version of it and is like a card that's fine versus Uro that's like been more problematic. And I think, yeah, like the real answer to Uro in general is just go over it, right? The problem with it in Modern, which is the format we're now going to talk about, segue, is like it's also going over what you're doing, because it's playing it and then playing Primeval Titan, or it's playing it to do bounce lands to like win the game, which just has its own layers of issues and power level. So I think yeah, Uro's on my list. I think, you know, we of the cards we already talked about, Arcane's Astrolabe is on my list of cards that need to be banned on Modern. The 4-color snow decks have been miserable. I think most people kind of agree. I think you can go look at Vincent's feed from Pleasant Kenobi of just like him calling for that card to be banned for now a year almost.
Let's start with what the card is, and we can explain to any newer listener kind of why this card is problematic. Because I think if you're a new player and you look at it on the surface, it's hard to understand why this card is so good. It's a common artifact that was printed in Modern Horizons this last year. It is cast for 1 snow mana, which you have to have a snow-covered land to cast. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and you can tap 1 colorless mana and tap it to generate 1 mana of any color. So it doesn't accelerate you, but it fixes your mana, and because it cycles for 1, it sort of allows you to play a deck that feels a little bit tighter, a little smaller, while still being able to play all the colors you want. So much so that the top couple decks right now in Modern are, 3-color snow control decks. It's not powerful like a Titan is powerful. It's just powerful in the sense that it makes Magic decks, you have to jump through a few less hoops to make things work. It's just the opportunity cost to play it is very, very, very low.
It's not even just that, right? The biggest issue is that lets decks just play 4 colors to 5 colors, no problem, with 0 cost, right? Before, in Modern and Pauper, Modern and Pauper, different conversation entirely, because there were no good dual lands. But in Modern, you'd play a bunch of fetches, you'd cost you life, so that's a cost, and Blood Moon being a card would also wreck you. Astrolabe makes it so Blood Moon doesn't do anything to you. You're able to play any color you want, and it is an artifact that draws you a card, right? So there's beyond the fact that it's letting you do something inherently breaking one of the key tenet rules of the game, it's allowing you to get extra bonuses in the sense that it's a permanent that draws you a card, it's an artifact to count towards artifact mana issues, it does kind of all these different things, and so it's kind of just been proven to be a problem in every format, right? The Modern has become, the fact that like the best mid-range deck is just going to be an Astrolabe deck because it can play all of the good cards. It can play any card you could ever want, and that is generally a recipe for a bad format. One of the reasons that Affinity was a negative in Mirrored and Black was because it couldn't, like, it was just like all the best cards were artifacts, so the deck that was the best deck just played all of those cards, and just every other deck was unviable. One of the problems with fetch lands in Standard in general now is it makes mana so good there that you could just play 4-color decks, and that's why Jace Vryn's Prodigy was a $100 card at one point, because just there was one deck. It played 4 colors, it played all the colors that were good, and it played all of the same cards. And so that's what you get an unhealthy format, and Astrolabe by itself not only allows you to do that without an issue, then is a benefit. It draws you a card, it makes your deck basically or ostensibly a 56 card deck, and also gives you synergies with a bunch of different cards.
I think also, again, and I don't think that you guys who are listening to the show necessarily by and large are newer players, because we are a Modern show and a lot of you guys have known us playing Modern for a long time, but just so people understand, if they ask the question, why is being able to play 4 colors easily a bad thing? It's not that it's a bad thing. It's a fun thing. It's cool to be able to play 4 colors. It feels great. The problem is Magic is a great game. It's a phenomenal game. But the puzzle that is Magic existing the way that it exists, you have to make it more difficult. That's the same reason, you don't want redundant, repetitive play format to format, game to game. It's one of the reasons the companion rule had to be changed, because you don't really want decks that just say, I'll play this thing or a version of this thing in every deck I play from here till eternity, because then every deck and every game starts to kind of feel the same, which makes Magic boring, and then they sell less packs.
And I would argue pretty thoroughly that it's a bad thing. So, one of Magic's strengths that games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon don't have is the color wheel, right? And there's an emotional reason that's strong, but the mechanical reason is it means that Magic will always be a diverse format of different decks. If you want to try a different deck, you can. You're not playing, if I go to a tournament, I'm not playing mono, the exact same deck every single round throughout that tournament. That's one of the reasons, you bring up Companions, that was one of the issues, right? Even though the different Loros decks were different, every single game Loros was in play on turn 3 or Yorion was in play on turn 4. So you have this negative of consistency of play that the color wheel is supposed to fix. The color wheel allows people to play, forces people to have to play different strategies. That's why red and green do different things, because they don't want you to be able to just play all the same things all the time. And decks that make it, if 4-color becomes the best strategy and it's easy to pull off, that diversity goes away. Because now it's...
Well, especially because to add to that, number one, because it's a non-rotating format, that means that from here on out, that's what you do. That's what Modern is. That the format becomes that format if you allow it to do that. Now, when I say it's not a bad thing, what I'm saying is from a player experience, if you want to build a deck and you're excited about all the cards in Magic and you want to create something really cool, and you're like, well, I want to be able to play this card and this card. I want Stoneforge, and I want to play Lower Skull Codal, and I want to play Lightning Bolt in the same deck. Well, the best way to do that is to play this thing that allows me to play all the colors I want. And if you're a player who wants to do something creative, good for you. This is a great card for you. But for the health of Magic as a long-term game, it's not great. And it's actually one of the big mistakes that happens time and time again is that they break the color pie. That's why Phyrexian Mana is such a problem. Anytime they lean heavily into breaking the color pie, and I don't mean like planar chaos break the color pie, let's print a Sunlance, like let's just like flip a card color, Serendib Sorcerer can be printed. Like that's fine. Occasionally you do that, it's okay. But like it's when you just say like any deck can play this effect, right? And that's the problem. And that's, I think, what it is. It creates a redundant, boring gameplay, and the ecosystem of Magic suffers because of it. Not the single player creative experience. That doesn't suffer as much.
I don't know if I agree with you for that. Because like Magic is a multiplayer game, right? You're not playing solitaire. I'm not just playing by myself. I'm playing with other people. And so if my experience is worse at a tournament because I've now played against the same 6 decks, if I'm playing just mirror matches for a tournament, that's miserable. And Astrolabe is a type of card that lends towards that happening more often, while also making things more then you add the layer of all the other synergies, right? It's not just like, hey, 4-color decks are the best deck. It's 4 colors are the best deck, and this draws you cards, and this gives you an artifact, so that Emery is a mana cheaper, and Urza is turned on earlier, and all of the different like 30 other things I can think of that make having an artifact in play is beneficial. Just I think is a reason it needs to go, and people have been calling for it. I think that Mystic Sanctuary is a card I can see them getting rid of. I can see them not yet. It's one that's like a little bit on the edge for me. It is the 7th most played land in the format, so it's in 25% of decks in Modern.
That's just because blue fetch land decks can get it, and it's a good thing you can get, and it's not really that bad to play otherwise. Like,
sure,
it's okay to play, but it's just like an especially good value piece.
That's like the negative, right? Like it's so free to play this card that every deck does, and it creates pretty miserable play experiences. If you have this in a Cryptic Command, you soft lock someone out of the game. If you have this and any extra turn spell that there's like different ways that this card is just like miserable to play with. In Pauper, dispel or despise.
Before we move on from it, because I think actually now that we're in the Modern format, like the card Kitchen Finks is probably the 3-mana card that, like, in terms of its turn 3 play, most feels similar, I guess, to Uro. Like, it doesn't do the same thing, but like when I play against somebody who's playing a Kitchen Finks, it gives me a similar feeling, which is like, if I'm attacking you, like, this kind of sucks. You're going to get like lots of value. You'll gain a bunch of life. This thing's going to be around. If you can find a way to get it back on the battlefield after it dies anyway, or blink it, like, it's going to be really hard for me to kill you. You're going to gain a lot of life. And you'll have a blocker forever. So why, in your opinion, is Kitchen Finks like so much more fair? Is it just because Uro has the back end of being a 6/6? Like, it's just it's a win condition?
Ramp is way better than blocker.
Right? Just okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Like, they're both threats. So like the threat sides are comparable. I mean, Kitchen Finks is attacking the next turn. Uro's like 2 turns slower, but Kitchen Finks is smaller. But like, yeah, I think putting extra land into play and drawing a card is a lot better than just gaining 2 life and having a hard to kill 3/2. I mean, and Kitchen Finks is really good. Like, that's insane, right? Like, Kitchen Finks is one of the historically format defining cards of Modern at many different points of its life cycle, doing different things, often comboing. But even like early days, it was just a part of Jund as a life gain hate card, and or just a beater in main deck.
Is it the best green-white card ever printed?
Didn't we do this? I think it is. I think it is. Green white's like pretty powerful. Like, I think
Kitchen Finks is like probably the most powerful.
You can sit on that.
Like Knight and like a few others were like right up.
I'm not a reliquary. The
Armadillo Cloak style. Well, not that one, but the other
there's
one.
What's the one that makes tokens whenever they cast an instant spell, and when it dies, you get a token.
Voice.
Gaddock Teague. That's more internal formats, but like extremely powerful in those formats. I think those are like all on that area.
That's like the range. But it is
Pride Mage might be better.
The greatest probably green-white creature ever.
Yeah,
is just like a pretty like pale imitation. I guess it's an uncommon, and like Uro's a mythic. So anyway,
it's like Kitchen Finks is seeing play in Standard right now, but that's because it's like, or Modern, but that's because it's good in Devotion or Devoted Druid decks that are like going infinite, using it as a combo piece, which it'll always be that the persist side of that mechanic. Where Uro like is just a different. I think they're more different than they're similar. Their main similar being 3-drop that gains you 2 life. Yeah, I don't know. I think that like Uro is just an obviously better card, and the fact that it's so much better, like it's so much better than Kitchen Finks, a card that is good in Modern, is like saying a lot about the card.
That's like kind of why I wanted to bring it up, because I feel like historically when I think about playing against Kitchen Finks, it's already miserable.
Right.
it's already miserable. It's like so much worse.
So Uro, Mystic Sanctuary, Arkham's Lab, Astrolab. Those are the three cards we kind of talked in other formats that pretty much are applicable to Modern in all the ways we discussed in those formats, with them being more powerful. Like Arkham's Astrolab is more powerful in Modern than it is in other formats. Just you have more good snow stuff available to you in Modern than you do in Pauper. You have Urza. You have like more artifacts matter cards that care about it in Modern, and you have more snow matters cards. So like just kind of all three sides of it, it's more powerful. Uro we just talked about, into the ground. And then Mystic Sanctuary is a card that also is just more powerful in Modern than any other format. There's fetch lands. Being able to fetch for Mystic Sanctuary was a bad idea. I guess I have a question for you. Would this card be would this card see as much play as it's seeing if it didn't have Island as a type?
The Island subtype? Yeah. Not even a little bit close.
Really?
Like,
you don't think so?
It's like...
Well, because Pauper it's seeing play without that being relevant, right? They don't fetch land. So it's literally just turn 4 land that lets you go loop Despise. Or Deprive.
Yeah, but it's also... They have a third of the available lands. Like most good lands ever printed that have like a cool ability are not common. They're almost exclusively rare. Sometimes you'll get like a Buried Ruin or like a Ghost Quarter, but like most of the time they're rare. Like most of the time, like the really cool stuff is rare. So like common, like honestly, in the history of Magic, if you think about common lands, like the ones that do something good, you'll have like the one from like Battle for Zendikar that like generates one of any color when it enters the battlefield, or you'll have like the old like invasion ones that can sacrifice to ramp you, or like, you know, there's like weird ones here and there that get printed from time to time.
Ash Barrens, the artifact lands, like the cycle lands are all commons.
Common, yeah. There's those ones from
the bounce lands, gates.
Yeah, and then I guess the whole entire cycle from Eldraine, which is it's a part of that cycle. Like those are all pretty cool. So like, I just think if it wasn't an island, you would just be dealing with the sort of chance of drawing a tapped land that like, if you draw it later, it's good and it has lots of value. But I just think maybe in Pauper it sees the same amount of play, but like in Modern, no.
Well, I think
nobody plays that in Modern.
I think in Pauper it absolutely does, because I don't think its island type matters too much in Pauper. I think in Modern it's still a staple. I think that like the fetch it is dumb. I think it's like a dumb thing that it can do. Like that should never have been a thing that exists. But I think this card sees play in Modern regardless. I think the fact that you can just like...
Well, explain to me the play pattern. So like the deck that it's good in, if it's not an island, like explain to me how you justify and how many copies.
On turn 5,
what does that look like?
If I have 2 in my deck, on turn 5 I win. And on turn 5 I have Cryptic Command every single turn. I counter your spell every turn for the rest of the game.
But okay, so what if it's like, but again, like you're balancing that against having 2 copies of tapped lands that are going to be tapped in your deck unless you hit them later in the game.
Modern, you play man lands, like creature based lands are in the format. Like there's a ton of lands that I've played in Modern that come into play tapped. You just mitigate it, right? You play if it's your hand tapped, you play it on turn 1 when you don't have a spell to play anyways, which like generally makes you play better because those decks are playing stuff like Serum Visions that the longer you wait, the better. You play that like on turn 3 when you have a 2-drop, right? It's pretty easy to micromanage your land drops, especially if you're playing a fetch mana base where most of the time you don't need to worry about it. That normally will be something that you can mitigate, especially because the play pattern is on turn 4 to cast Deprive and return it to your hand. So from that point on, you're now just... like it could have been in play, so you can put it on turn 1 or turn 3 whenever you weren't going to do something with that extra mana. I mean, it's not. Yeah, I think that's pretty mitigatable, especially if you're only playing.
You think it gets worse, but it's still for sure played. Like no question.
Yes, yeah. I don't think it's as good, right? You don't have it. It's not tutorable. It's not tutorable by like a third of your deck, or I guess a fourth.
Well, I guess to your point, like tapped lands that like monocolored tapped lands that you always are going. So, okay, it's not always tapped.
Right.
Treetop Village was played in Jund forever as a tapped green source that was always tapped, right? I don't think they play Treetop Village anymore. I guess I've seen some decks play it, but I feel like that got phased out. Like, I can't think of very many monocolored lands that definitely come into play tapped a high percentage of the time that see much play in Modern. Like, can you think of any?
I mean, monocolor, no, but I think the power level of this is high enough to mitigate that. I think like this is comparable to a colorless card, especially because it comes into play tapped in the turn that matter, untapped the turn it matters. In control decks, 4 mana coming into play untapped are more important than like a fast land, right? And like
that's an interesting idea, isn't it?
Right,
you said, what if this card was a colorless land? What if this was comes into play tapped colorless land that just referenced if you have 3 other lands?
It comes into play untapped, and does it come into play untapped ever? I don't think it matters. I think this card sees play if it's a colorless tapped land that returns a spell and puts it on top of your deck.
Just always. Yeah, I guess I was thinking if if it came into play tapped, created colorless mana, and if you had 3 basic lands in play, entered untapped. Like that was like, and I think it's probably thinking about that. It's probably still just as good. It being blue is almost irrelevant. Like it's the fact that it referenced.
Yeah, it coming into play untapped is irrelevant. I think a land card that enters play tapped and produces no mana that returns a spell to the top of your deck every turn when you cast it is probably too good. If they ban it, I mean, like they might not ban it, and then we're going to live in a world where it's still considered fine by Wizards. But I think long term this card goes. It might happen this week.
My guess is this one doesn't. Yeah. I don't think this one. I don't think this one goes this week. If I'm a betting man. The only other card that we didn't really talk about that had been like on the chopping block for a while, and I think it's less problematic now with it.
I have 2 cards.
There's 2 more?
And there's one card that like is the card I think is going to be banned more than any other. But we can talk about what you're going to talk about, and I can go.
The one I was going to say, and I think you'd agree, is that without Luris, I don't think Mishra's Bauble is really problematic in the same way. I don't think that'll get banned.
No. Yeah. So Mishra's Bauble's totally fine. I mean, in long run, it might not be. Like it has the issues it always has, which we talked about way back in the day. Which was like way back in the day, like 6 weeks ago. In 2020, a year that was both 10 days long and 60 years long. I think that like in the long run, maybe because it does do things in a bad way. Like it's a free artifact, which I think has its issues. 2 cards. First, Field of the Dead is the first one. And that is a card that I also could see them being banned in theoretically Historic and Pioneer. Pioneer, once again, is weird because of the issue with Inverter. But just like Field of the Dead is such a miserable card. It does something the format has a card that was more fun and has been around with Valakut for a long time. It just like incentivized play in a weird way and is just kind of miserable. And I wish that card was never printed.
It's funny that,
love land strategies.
Me too. And I, one of the, I'll do my standard mention of Highlander Gauntlet once in the episode, and I will say that in that format, all of us have a lands deck. Like that's the thing we all have. You've got one, I've got one, Eric's got one, and mine is pretty color heavy. Like I play, it's like a Jund deck. It plays like heavy, and so I haven't been able to justify. And I have Valakut and Scape Shift in there, but I haven't been able to justify playing Field of the Dead. Like I can't talk myself into it, but like more and more and more, it's just like, this is so dumb. Why am I not playing?
I'm going to talk yourself into it.
So good.
You just cut a spell, play it.
Yeah, right.
It's better than 90% of the spells in that deck. And that deck is playing like I'm like crop rotation is what I'm comparing this card to as like levels of good. Like this card, all of the goodness that we said about Uro, this card's comparable, I think, to Uro in like power level. Like
freaking land. It's just a land.
Right? Like, it's a land. It's impossible to get rid of. Even if you get rid of it, they have multiples. The decks that play them often have ways to get them back. It's just something that I think should go, and like the world would be a better place for it. The last card that has a potential, I think this is the one that has the biggest target on its face. Right now, Aether Gust is the 3rd most played spell in the format. Third most played card overall, more than anything else, because the number 1 played card in the format that has seen bannings everywhere else is Veil of Summer, and I think this card's going now. I think it's just like it's in 40% of decks of the format. It like has a track record of being banned in other places, right? Like it's whenever a card is already on a ban list somewhere else and there's a banning announcement, I look a lot harder at that card, and when that card is on a ban list in another format and it's 40% of the metagame in this format, I can't imagine this card surviving past Monday. Like more than any other card we talked about, I feel like this is the biggest lock in any format. And I think like there are cards that we talked about that are also being banned everywhere. I think like Uro has the least likelihood chance of being banned places, and I think this has the highest chance.
Can we just talk for a second about, so I'm going to read the text on Veil of Summer just so you guys all understand that the wording on the card is a little weird, and I have always thought so, but yeah, Veil of Summer reads, hang on, pull up in front of me here. Come on, load. Here we go. Veil of Summer reads, draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and from black until end of turn. Now, I think that the wording on this card and the way that it kind of relates to older cards that are similar was a little confusing to players when this got spoiled. I think people read it and were like,
what is it?
We'll just compare this to all of, because it's a little complicated. I mean, it's you get it if you read it, but like they've been doing this type of thing since the dawn of time, right? Mm-hmm. Blue Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, you go to like Flash Freeze or like those types of cards have been printed forever. But it's really interesting that this particular cycle, the Aether Gust and the Veil of Summer cycle, these cards are like, we're talking about Flash Freeze level cards. Like these are supposed to be uncommon color centric answers, and we're banning them. That's how push these cards are.
I think part of it is, and you could say this about the year in some ways, is that there are cards that are as good as they are because it was Wizards saying, I'm sick of these cards not being good enough. You know what? We've done 5-color hate card cycles since Alpha. Like Circle of Protection is the first one. Right. And the green one that hates on its 2 enemies is always or generally garbage. Even the best one I could think of before this, which was the like anti-fairies elk.
Like great stable stag.
Like was fine. Was like a fine sideboard card out of Jund for 3 months. And Veil of Summer was then being like, you know what? It does everything. It counters the spell. It gives you protection. Thoughtseize, you're out. Counterspell, you're done. Regular cards, you'll draw cards even. So it even cantrips itself. So it's never wasted. Or it's most of the time not wasted as long as they're playing those colors. And then it's just eventually they got there, but they pushed it way too over the hump, and now it's just way too powerful, and that's just what happened. And I think it's fine that this card existed. I think it just needs to go. Like, I think it's just time.
I also think the fact that it's green is the big problem, because like if you characterize every color and like what they're supposed to feel like as a player, there's a level to green that has always supposed to have felt kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm playing like this big dumb animal. And if you counter my big dumb animal or you kill it, like, okay, but I have the best cost for my big dumb animal than any color. None of you other colors are going to be able to play something as beefy and cool for as cheap as me. And like, that's what I do. But they're like, okay, we're going to just allow you to play your giants thing, but then also back it up with 1 mana that cycles. Like you get a blue spell in green to protect all your huge things. You don't even have to go outside the color pie. You can just play green. That's where, to me, it's like...
Yeah, and the fact that it hates on blue and black, which are arguably the second and best color outside of green, in a lot of formats at least, like, and the most interactive color, well, that's not totally true, but the most like likely to hit the stack, I guess, right? Is like, this is more of a goodbye Thoughtseize, goodbye Counterspell. And those are very relevant in Modern. Those are like the 2 stopgaps to the stack in the game. The only ones. So it kind of is this weird green answer to the stack. And maybe just green shouldn't be able to do that. It went to the same college as Questing Beasts of way too many words on a card. I think that's one of the reasons it like got undervalued immediately, because it was like, what does this say? You draw a card if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. Does that mean if it's on the stack? I guess if it is on the stack, I still draw a card. Okay, now I'm understanding. Okay, spells you control can't be countered this turn. Okay. Which is like weird, but also relevant because like blue's the only other than like random white card. And then a permanent you control gain hexproof from blue and from black until end. So it's like so many layers and also weird mechanics. Me having hexproof is weird. What does that count? Does that like, and if I give myself hexproof, it's just like it uses the stack in such a weird way that I think that like it was hard to grok at first, and then just like blew up every format it was in, and now it's just too powerful. It needs to go.
I mean, think about what that just like from like a very basic standpoint, like what it means. If you are on the play and you play a fetch land, and then you pass to your opponent, and they attempt to crack their own fetch in Death Shadow, the Thoughtseize you, and they cast it, and you Veil of Summer, you're countering their spell and drawing a card. They can't target you because you have hexproof, and you're drawing a card. Like, blue doesn't have counter target spell draw a card for 1 blue in Modern. It doesn't have counter target instant or sorcery spell unless they pay 1, draw a card. Like, if it did, it'd be nuts. I would freaking love that card. I'd lose my mind for that card.
So I honestly believe that if they printed this card in blue, it would be bad. Not bad.
Same color, like switch green for blue, you mean? So it target black or blue?
No, it would be a blue Veil of Winter, 1 blue, draw a card if an opponent has cast a red or green spell this turn. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. You and permanents you control gain hexproof from green and red cards this turn. I think that card's bad. I think it's like maybe a burn hate card.
Well, yeah, because basically red's 1-drop that they want to be able to do is a lightning bolt, and white's 1-drop they want to be able to do is a path to exile. So neither of them target you unless burn is just burning you out, which if they are, like, you have other things that are better than that.
Maybe the red one targets you. Good. Yeah, Thoughtseize targets you. Like red count because green counters black and blue, which are like obviously very powerful to do this too. White counters red and black. So white might be like white could be very good countering.
I think though if you say it's in blue and it focuses on green and red. Then I think the only problem there is that if you tell me my sideboard plan of having 3 dispels that I can bring in so I can counter lightning bolts is now I'm bringing in a card that both counters lightning bolt and draws me a card. I think that's probably a little good. Like, I think that's for blue but to have that. That's pretty sweet. I think
it's still good, but I don't think it's at this power level. I think the fact that it targets what it targets has a lot to do with it.
And 1 blue instant counter target red spell draw a card is a card that gets played in sideboards across the land. Like, that's for sure.
But for blue elemental blast does not see much play.
Yep.
In Legacy, right? Like,
but it doesn't draw a card though.
Sure, but I don't even know if it sees play if it draws a card. Like, there's not that many in Legacy.
I think you're underestimating why is Astrolab so good. It's not just because it fixes your colors.
Well, but
if it just fixes your colors and didn't draw you a card.
But it only draws you a card if they play a red spell or a green spell, right? Like, it's not draw a card, do this. It's draw a card if your opponent is doing this. Otherwise, it doesn't.
But it's a sideboard card, so it's only in your deck if that matters. Sure. Is my point. So like. I think we had a whole conversation to start this episode about Astrolab. I think you can literally define this as like, if your thing costs 1 mana and it draws a card and does something else relevant, whether it's intended to be a main deck card or a sideboard card, you're pushed past that level of like kind of good into this is so good.
Pretty much anything beyond give keyword ability.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, for goodness sake, like we play Opt. It doesn't exactly do that much. Like, Opt is like pretty weak, but like you play it, it scries 1 and draws a card.
Right. Like trample, like anything that doesn't like target a creature, basically. Like you like sees play. Peak doesn't see play, I guess.
It has though. Peak has seen plenty of play in Modern. Like it saw play in Infect. It saw play in Splinter Twin decks. Yeah.
I mean, Gitaxian Probe. Well, it saw a little, but Gitaxian Probe just replaced it much. Like it was never. They were never playing 5 of those. Yeah, no, it's interesting how just like 1 mana draw card plus any ability that you can do all the time is probably worth considering playing in some way.
I also think like if you're talking about the value of Peak or the value of whatever we did, like Opt, right? Those are like cards that Peak kind of interacts, Opt doesn't interact. But even if Veil of Summer or these fictional cards we're talking about are sideboard cards, when you bring them in out of your sideboard, they are absolutely interacting and drawing a card, which is actually way, way better than Opt and way better than Peak. Because like if you're bringing it in and it's countering a spell or it's making you have hexproof or something, if you're like invalidating something and drawing a card for 1 mana at instant speed, like that's an insanely good card.
Yes, other than it's like we're now talking about the cost of like sideboard cards, and this is a very good sideboard card against Jund and Burn, which is like widespread, like worth playing. Right, I played Deathmark in Modern, so like that's not out of the question. Not Deathmark's good against other decks, but like same concept. The issue you run into is like are those relevant to the metagame? Does it matter that I can fight those decks off? And it is a real cost to draw them, and at most, I'm not going to play 4 of them, so I'm playing 2 of them in the sideboard, so I have to draw it. I have to draw it within a relevant turn. So there's still the negatives of being a sideboard card, right? Rest of Peace exists and is fine. So say this card's as good as Rest of Peace is against Dredge, against Burn. I think it's fine. This is different. This is main decked by decks because they know that by having it in their deck, they're getting so much value off their other cards that it just totally wrecks them out of existence and gets rid of the 2 of the 3 main ways people interact in this format, being counter magic and discard.
It is interesting that Aether Gust is designed to have a similarly sort of thinking outside the box color hate wording, the way that you can put this, you can counter the spell or put the spell on top of their things that have protection or uncounterable, you can still put on the bottom of their library. That's a very unique thing that card does. And I think it is interesting that it's part of that same cycle. I didn't even realize that about Aether Gust, to be honest, for a little while. It took me a minute to realize that that's actually what that card could do.
Sure.
When you realize that it has that added ability, it's wow. This is them just clearly realizing that Flash Freeze isn't good enough. It's just not good enough.
Well, but this is worse. It's weird how this choose target spell or permanent that's red or green. Its owner puts it on top of the bottom of their library.
So it's the same as Flash Freeze doesn't just counters it, right? But if I take your spell that's uncounterable and put it on the bottom of your library, it's basically the same thing.
That's the issue. Yeah, it gets around the counterability factor. This doesn't counter anything. That's why it's played. Sorry, I had to readjust my brain.
Totally. You're literally validating my point though. I was on air on Twitch Rivals with Nathan, and we were literally talking about this card, and I misassigned what it did, and then after the show, I realized what I had done. I was oh wow. I missed this. I didn't realize this card.
It's the reason other cards that don't counter, the word countering, the fact that Veil of Summer says spells can't be countered this turn. This allows you to counter those spells because it gets around that clause, and that's why it's seeing played. That's why it's the 3rd most played spell in the format. This is an unhealthy format. The fact that Veil of Summer, Lightning Bolt, Aether Gust, Arkham's Astrolabe, and Ashiok are the top 5 most played cards. Then Uro, that's the top 6. That's unhealthy. That needs to stop. And the reason Cryptic Command is in the top 10 right now is because of
Mystic
Sanctuary. This is why I think they're going to ban a lot of these cards. Now, that's a crazy large number. If they ban Astrolabe, Uro, that's why I don't think Uro's going. If they ban Astrolabe, Uro, Veil of Summer, Field of the Dead, and Mystic Sanctuary, that's one of the largest bannings of all time. So I don't think that's happening. So I think
let's take our bets on predictions, because this is going to come out. You guys are going to watch this on Friday, and you maybe over the weekend, and then Monday morning they'll announce this, and Tuesday. Either Tuesday we'll announce maybe we'll even do a Monday live thing, because we sometimes in the banning announcements we do those early. Maybe we'll do a live episode, but we'll react to this. But if you're making your picks, if you're making your calls for what do you think is actually going to get banned, what's your prediction for Modern? Just for Modern.
Veil of Summer, Arkham's Astrolabe. That's it.
Yeah. So you're leaving Field. You're leaving Uro.
With a hedge on 50-50 chance on Mystic Sanctuary.
Yeah, Mystic doesn't get banned. Neither does Field. I don't think Uro does either. I think I'm with you. I think it's Astrolabe and Veil of Summer.
I think Mystic Sanctuary is the only other card that's warping the metagame, right? If you look at these lists, it's the one that's also causing weird shenanigans on what cards are seeing play and what cards aren't. But I could see them wanting to see what a world looks like with that card in it and Veil of Summer and Astrolabe not in the format. But that would be my
one
guess.
thing. My one thing with Sanctuary that I think I think Sanctuary won't get banned for this reason.
Ever?
I think it's good
right now.
Now,
okay.
I think it's good. It's not in the top 2 offenders, and the thing that makes Mystic Sanctuary good, it's not because you play it as a land, you have priority and your ability will resolve before they can respond, which is what some land abilities have had problems with in the past, is that your land comes in, you have priority, you can do something with it. The fact that it comes in and triggers, you can still respond to the graveyard the same way you can respond to the graveyard with a million other decks. Like graveyard is important in Modern and has been. There's a zillion ways to respond to graveyards, and like I realize that it's a land, so like that's what makes it problematic. But even so, it doesn't feel to me like if that card became problematic enough, decks wouldn't just have the right hate to not lose to it. So I think that's why it doesn't get banned. I think Astrolab.
Let's make that's us hedging our bets. I'm going to say it gets banned. You're saying it's not getting banned. We both agree Veil of Summer and Astrolab are getting banned, and we might be totally wrong, but I think that's a good us as a podcast hedging our bets. And then Michael. Marshall said Uro for sure getting banned, and Michael was like, Field of the Dead going away 100%. They were like, for sure, those are the cards. But yeah, I think that's a safe middle ground. In other formats, like, to be honest, I don't know how far they're going to go reaching. The one interesting thing is going to be, does this ban, like, it's so many formats at once. Do they ban a bunch of stuff at once, right? Like, are they just going to be like, you know what, Mystic Sanctuary was a mistake. All these formats, it's gone. Uro was a mistake. All these formats, it's gone. Astrolabe was a mistake. All these formats, it's gone. Or do they pick and choose between the different formats the way they kind of do normally, which I would like less? I think like I'm more on the side of Wizards just biting bullets now and being like, if we're gonna ban cards, we're gonna like if we think like I wish Oko was banned out of every format that it was a problem in all at once instead of then like waiting for so long to figure out that it was a problem in every format it needed to be banned in. And yeah, that's kind of, I think, where I'm at. The one interesting thing is that we haven't talked about, and I want to briefly touch upon it, though we don't have to talk too long. Are they going to unban a card? In any format? Now I have no idea about Historic, or because Historic's ban list is wonky.
Let's just talk Modern. I've got the list pulled up in front of me. I'm gonna read the list right now, one by one, and real quick, you tell me if there's any chance. All right, you stop me. You tell me stop if you need me to stop. Okay, ready? Ancient Den, Birthing Pod, Blazing Troll, Bridge from Below.
No.
Say what?
I don't. So far,
Chrome Mox.
No.
Cloud Post.
No.
Dark Depths.
No.
Deathrite Shaman.
No.
Dig Through Time. Dread Return.
No.
Ivugan.
No.
Faithless Looting. Kickstaxian
Maybe.
Probe.
No.
Glimpse of Nature.
No.
Grave Troll.
Nature?
Yeah, Glimpse of Nature. That's the green one. Draws you a card whenever creatures comes into play.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking of what's the mill card for blue and black? Glimpse the Unthinkable.
I love that card. Grave Troll.
No.
Great Furnace.
No.
Green Sun Zenith.
No. That one's closer, but no, definitely not Ogak.
Hypergenesis.
Nope.
Ironworks.
No.
Mental Misstep.
No.
Mox Opal.
No.
Lattice.
No.
Oko.
No.
Once Upon a Time.
No.
Ponder.
No.
Preordain.
I would hope so, but no.
Punishing Fire.
No.
Rite of Flame.
No.
Seed of the Synod.
No.
Second Sunrise.
Nope.
Seething Song.
Nope.
Top.
No.
Skull Clamp.
No.
Splinter Twin.
Maybe.
Summer Bloom.
No.
Treasure Cruise.
No.
Tree of Tales, you said no already. Umazawa's Jite.
No.
And then Vault of Whispers. So the only card that you really are actually considering is maybe Splinter Twin. It sounds like.
No. I said maybe to Faithless Looting. Those would be my two.
Gitaxian Probe, I think you said. I think those are the three.
No. I meant. I don't think they'll unban Gitaxian Probe. I think they could unban Faithless Looting. I don't think they will, which sucks. But I think that it. Yeah, I don't think Faithless Looting is being unbanned this quickly. I do think that Splinter Twin could be unbanned. The only other cards like Preordain and Birthing Pod, like those three cards are the only cards I can see them thinking of unbanning. And like Birthing Pod and Preordain, I don't think are going to happen. I think they're never going to unban Preordain. I think it's like.
I think, okay, here's my thought. So on those two ones, because I agree with you on the ones I read through, right? So Preordain, I think Preordain would be fine. Like, I think we all can kind of agree. It's like the format is so powerful now that having just a better blue cantrip is. I mean, the blue deck should get better, and I guess maybe it would make Delver a player. I guess maybe, like, possibly, but it's not a big deal. Birthing Pod they won't unban. I think for the number one reason of just like Modern is sort of grindy anyway. Like it has like a lot of like kind of oppressive planeswalkers and things that are just like annoying, that just exist that are annoying. And I don't think Birthing Pod makes the format more fun. It just makes the format like a lot more like grindy, which like I'm not excited about.
I disagree. Birthing Pod's so fun,
Okay.
but sure. I disagree with your reasons. I don't disagree with. I think it's just such a powerful engine, and it's so similar to what Luros was doing that they didn't like that, and it's a weird thing because Luros's issue wasn't that was like what it did was cool. It was that it was so consistent, and that has all of its layers that Birthing Pod is a part of. So it'd be weird that now is the moment they want to bring it back, unless it's a like, sorry Luros players, here's a bone. But I just don't
see it happening. I think there's so many more powerful creatures since the banning. The card that I do think, though, I agree with you on is Splinter Twin, and actually now that we talk about it, thinking about Modern, thinking about Magic, thinking about the history of Modern, I'm going to make the bold call and say that I believe they're going to unban Splinter Twin. I think that's going to happen. I actually thinking about it now, like, of all the things we've talked about tonight, that actually feels to me like the decision where I'm like, that will not
Magic better
at all. It's not going to surprise me for a second because like the curve, the way it works, how it interacts with the rest of the format, like none of it's problematic. We've seen so many tests now on all the different sites of like just how good is this if you compare it to the rest of what's being played. I actually think that's going to happen. I really think Splinter Twin's going to get unbanned. I think we're going to see Veil of Summer banned. I think we're going to see the other card we mentioned.
Ashweb
banned. And I think they're going to unban Twin. I think that's actually going to happen. I'm making that my shot call.
If they unban Twin, they have to unban Mystic Sanctuary. They have to ban Mystic Sanctuary. I don't think those two cards can exist in the same deck together.
Blue and Modern with fetch lands, just being able to get back pieces of interaction too consistently, like
with Splinter Twin. Right, like having Splinter Twin a deck that is all flash cards, being able to just like rebuy Cryptic Commands with my lands. I think that sounds problematic. I'm not saying I think they might ban Mystic Sanctuary. That was my shot call. So like, I'm not saying that won't happen. I'm just, I don't think those two decks should exist together. I think that's too good, but I don't think that means that they want to ban Splinter Twin. I just think they'd have to ban Mystic Sanctuary.
Well, we will see. We will see. I think it sounds like you and I will probably do like an emergency, either hot take episode.
Yeah, I'd say there's not going to be a hot take this week in the classic sense, in the sense that there won't be an edited video. It's going to be on Monday next week. We'll do a live stream at some point during the day to talk about in response to the bannings.
Yeah, it's important, and we'll be excited to do it. So, guys, be sure to follow along with everything that we're doing. You guys can check out patreon.com/theMMcast. Check out what I just streamed my very first MTG Arena games. I did a draft. You guys can follow me at Ben Bateman Streaming. That was on Friday. I'll be doing more this week. I'll actually be announcing, not today, but next week on the show, I will be announcing my actual streaming schedule. I'm figuring it out now, how I can make it work with my schedule. But I will be streaming Magic at least one night a week, if not two. That will include some Moto. That will include some streaming. That will include some historic. And I know I've talked about it in the past, but I actually did it. I actually did my first one, and I streamed it, and you guys were watching. It was really fun. Alex jumped in there and made fun of me. So be sure to follow along on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ben Bateman Streaming.
And I am at Kes Wiley everywhere. I would love for you to follow me on Twitter. I also stream on Twitch once a week. I also am just on the internet, and we do videos on our YouTube channel. So make sure to like and subscribe down there. There is content that goes on the YouTube that isn't on our podcast. So definitely, if you're a audio only listener, just definitely subscribe on YouTube as well to make sure you get access to the hot takes we mentioned. You get access to random deck techs that we do, commander content, random straight to camera editorials, and etc. So definitely make sure to subscribe there, and then also you'll be able to catching some streams and everything else. Other than that, we thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you patrons for supporting us. Thank you Marshall for editing every episode, making us look better than we can make ourselves look.
He makes us look damn fine.
Yeah. And thank you to our official Masters of Modern podcast sponsor, Cracklin Oat Brand. Hashtag MMCast Cracklin Goat with a G.
Hashtag
Cracklin Goat Brand. please tweet at Kellogg's and ask them to sponsor us. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.